A young woman walks into work on an ordinary Friday. She punches her clock. She fills prescriptions. She smiles at customers. And then at 6:47 p.m. she vanishes. For 29 years, no one knows what happened to her. Her name is Evelyn King. She's 21 years old. And on September 15, 1995, she simply ceases to exist. At least that's what everyone believes. Police launch a desperate search. Volunteers comb the streets. Her face plasters every bulletin board in Cheyenne, Wyoming. Her mother goes on television begging for answers. The whole town is gripped by one question. Where is Evelyn King? But here's what no one expects. In 2024, after nearly 3 decades of searching, investigators finally find her. She's alive. She's been alive the entire time. And the moment they locate her, everything the town believed about her disappearance shatters. Because Evelyn King didn't vanish. She ran. What happened in those 29 years of silence? What forced a 21-year-old pharmacy student to abandon her entire life, her family, her identity? That's the mystery we're about to uncover. But before we do, I need to know, where are you watching from right now? Drop your country in the comments. Let's see how far Evelyn's story travels. This is her case. This is her truth. Let's begin. To understand what happened to Evelyn King, we have to understand who Evelyn King was. She was born in 1974 in Cheyenne, a girl with dark eyes, quiet intelligence, and an almost stubborn determination. Her parents, immigrants from a conservative cultural background, had come to America with a singular vision, a better life for their children. Her father worked construction. Her mother cleaned houses. They saved every penny. They believed in education. They believed in structure. They believed in family loyalty above all else. Evelyn had 2 siblings, an older brother and a younger sister. From photographs, we can see she was beautiful in an understated way. Not flashy. Not rebellious. Just thoughtful. The kind of girl who studied late into the night, who wore sensible clothes, who listened more than she spoke. By the time Evelyn entered high school, something became clear. She was brilliant. Not just smart, brilliant. Her teachers recognized it immediately. Her grades were immaculate. She loved science. Chemistry fascinated her. The precision of it. The logic. The way one element combined with another to create something entirely new. Her parents noticed her academic gifts too, and they did what any immigrant family would do. They encouraged her to become a doctor. Or a pharmacist. A profession. Security. Respect. The American dream materialized through professional achievement. Evelyn, in turn, seemed to embrace this destiny. She attended the University of Wyoming. She enrolled in pharmacy school. She was on track to earn her degree, to build a respectable career, to make her parents proud. To the outside world, Evelyn King's life was a textbook success story. Her peers remember her as focused, serious, someone who kept to herself. She had friends, but she wasn't the type to go out drinking or stay out late. She worked part-time at a local pharmacy to pay for her education. She was independent. She was ambitious. She was exactly the kind of daughter any parent would be proud to raise. But what no one knew, what almost no one in Cheyenne understood, was the invisible weight pressing down on Evelyn's shoulders. Behind closed doors in her parents' home, a different story was unfolding. Evelyn's family had begun to orchestrate something her parents believed was her duty. Something that was tradition. Something that was, in their view, necessary for her future happiness and family honor. But to Evelyn it felt like a prison cell closing in one lock at a time. They wanted her to marry. But not someone she chose. Someone they chose. And as the autumn of 1995 approached, that arranged marriage was no longer theoretical. It was imminent. It was real. It was happening. Evelyn, the brilliant pharmacy student with her whole life ahead of her, was about to be forced into a destiny she never agreed to. And for a 21-year-old woman trying to forge her own identity in America, that realization became unbearable. Cheyenne, Wyoming in 1995 was a city of roughly 50,000 people. Not large. Not small. A place where everyone knew everyone else's business, where gossip traveled faster than the wind across the high plains, and where a person's reputation, their family's reputation, mattered more than almost anything else. The 90s in Cheyenne felt frozen in time in some ways. Technology was still emerging. Most homes didn't have the internet yet. Cell phones existed, but they were rare, expensive, bulky. If you wanted to disappear in 1995, you actually could disappear. You could get in a car, drive across state lines, and vanish into America's vastness. There would be no digital breadcrumbs. No Instagram posts. No constant connection. No one would know where you were unless you told them. This was the perfect era to disappear. Cheyenne was also a city with deep cultural diversity, though not always harmoniously so. Immigrant communities existed here. Families from Asia, the Middle East, Latin America, Eastern Europe, all trying to build lives in America while holding on to the traditions of their homelands. Some families embraced American culture immediately. Others clung fiercely to the old ways. They maintained tight-knit communities. They preserved religious customs. They arranged marriages the way their ancestors had for generations. In mainstream Cheyenne culture, an arranged marriage would have been shocking. It would have seemed archaic, controlling, almost unbelievable in the land of freedom and self-determination. But within certain cultural enclaves it was normal, expected, non-negotiable. For girls like Evelyn, straddling two worlds, fluent in both American and traditional culture, the conflict was unbearable. She had tasted independence through her education. She had experienced the American promise, you can be whoever you want. But her parents were telling her something entirely different. You will do what we say. The pharmacy where Evelyn worked was a regular community institution. A place where Cheyenne's citizens filled prescriptions, picked up small talk, gathered gossip. Her coworkers saw her as reliable, quiet, smart. No one noticed the cracks forming. No one knew about the fights at home. No one understood that a brilliant young woman was suffocating under the weight of family duty. The city of Cheyenne, with its isolation, its conservative undercurrents, its tight cultural networks, had no idea it was about to lose one of its own. And when Evelyn vanished, the entire town would assume the worst. They would search. They would call. They would pray. But they would never think to ask the most obvious question. What if she left on purpose? Friday, September 15, 1995. A crisp autumn morning in Cheyenne. The kind of day where you can feel fall approaching, cooler mornings, the hint of winter on the wind, trees beginning their slow transformation. Evelyn King wakes up. She dresses for work. She doesn't know this will be the last normal day of her life. Or perhaps she does. Perhaps she's been planning this moment for weeks. Perhaps she's been saving money. Preparing. Waiting for the right moment. 6:15 p.m. Evelyn finishes her shift at the pharmacy. A coworker, let's call her Sarah, remembers this moment. She recalled later that Evelyn seemed different that evening. Quieter than usual. When Sarah asked her something mundane about the next shift, Evelyn didn't answer immediately. She was somewhere else. Somewhere distant. Sarah watched Evelyn take off her pharmacy vest. Watched her gather her purse. Watched her move toward the door. See you tomorrow? Sarah called out. Evelyn paused. Just for a second. Long enough to be strange. Then she said, maybe. Not, yes. Not, see you then. Just maybe. Sarah thought it was an odd thing to say, but she didn't dwell on it. She had no way of knowing those would be among the last words anyone would hear from Evelyn King. 6:30 to 6:45 p.m. The next 15 minutes are a void. Police would later struggle with this gap. Did Evelyn drive her car? Did someone pick her up? Did she take a bus? The exact details of how she left would remain unclear. But what matters is that she did leave. 6:47 p.m. This is the last confirmed sighting of Evelyn King for the next 29 years. The exact time varies slightly depending on which witness statement police relied on, but the evening was darkening. The sun was setting. Cheyenne streets were shifting from daylight to dusk, that vulnerable hour when people are heading home, when attention is divided, when a person could slip away relatively unnoticed. Evening hours, 7 p.m. to 11 p.m. Something is wrong. Evelyn was supposed to be home. Her family expected her. As the evening deepened, concern began to build. The hours stretched. No call. No message. Remember, in 1995 there were no cell phones for most people, no way to quickly reach someone. Absence was truly absence. 11 p.m. or midnight. The official report is made. Evelyn King is missing. She did not come home. She did not call. No one knows where she is. Morning of September 16th. Police are notified. A missing persons report is filed. Evelyn's family is in a state of panic. Her mother is frantic. Her father is grim. Her siblings are confused. Where could she be? Had she gotten in an accident? Was she taken? Was she hurt? The questions multiply. The fear escalates. But what Evelyn's family doesn't know, what no one knows, is that Evelyn is making choices. Real choices. Deliberate choices. She's not a victim of fate. She's not a victim of circumstance. She's a victim of a system that gave her no options. And so she chose to disappear. By midnight on September 15, 1995, Evelyn King had made a decision that would ripple through the next 29 years. A decision that would devastate her family. A decision that would consume a detective. A decision that would haunt an entire town. But she made it anyway. Because the alternative was unthinkable. By dawn on Saturday, September 16th, Cheyenne knew that a young woman was missing. The news spread like wildfire. Missing pharmacy student. 21 years old. Dark hair. Last seen Friday evening. Details were sketchy, but the core fact was undeniable. Evelyn King had vanished. Police immediately launched a search operation. They were serious about it. This was before missing persons cases received the kind of media saturation they do today, but authorities still took it seriously. Search parties were organized. Volunteers from the community came forward. Concern rippled through Cheyenne's neighborhoods. A photograph of Evelyn was selected, a formal shot, the kind taken for identification. In it, she looks directly at the camera with an almost haunted expression. Dark eyes. Serious. Beautiful in a way that photographs couldn't quite capture. This image was reproduced. Printed. Plastered on telephone poles, on community bulletin boards, in local newspapers and on local television. Have you seen this woman? The question became ubiquitous. Store owners taped her photograph to their windows. Libraries displayed her picture. Buses carried her face through the streets of Cheyenne. Evelyn's mother went on camera. The footage from that era is grainy, emotional, raw. She begged for information. She pleaded with anyone who might have seen her daughter. She couldn't articulate the specific fear, not in a way that made sense to police or to the community, because she herself didn't fully understand what had happened. Had Evelyn been taken? Had she met with an accident? Had she gotten lost? The mother's anguish was real. Authentic. Everyone who saw her on television felt it. The community responded. Volunteers formed search parties. They combed parks and forests. They dragged nearby ponds. They knocked on doors. They called tips into police. For a brief window, days, perhaps a week or two, Evelyn King was the center of everyone's attention. She was a mystery that demanded solving. But as days turned into weeks and weeks turned into months, something shifted. The initial panic gave way to frustration. The massive search efforts dwindled. No body was found. No witnesses came forward with definitive information. No breakthrough occurred. Police seemed stalled. The family's pleas for help became more desperate, but also more futile. The community, however, had moved on. By the end of 1995, Cheyenne had largely forgotten about Evelyn King. She was filed away in the cold case box. Her photograph came down from bulletin boards. Her mother's televised pleas became a memory. The town's attention shifted to new concerns, new crimes, new dramas. Evelyn had become what every family dreads: a ghost. A name mentioned in passing. A story told in whispers. Whatever happened to that girl from the pharmacy? No one ever found out. But someone had found out. She was just somewhere else. Living under a different name. In a different state. Building a different life. Evelyn King hadn't disappeared. She had simply left Cheyenne behind. Detective Michael Harrison was a 15-year veteran of the Cheyenne Police Department when Evelyn King's case landed on his desk. He was experienced. Dedicated. The kind of detective who didn't let cases go. From day one, Harrison pursued multiple theories. Theory 1, kidnapping. Was Evelyn taken by force? Police examined her movements that evening with forensic precision. They questioned her coworkers extensively. They looked for signs of struggle. They considered whether she might have been abducted by a stranger, a predator who'd been watching her. The possibility was real. Missing young women were often victims of violent crime. But despite exhaustive searching, no evidence of kidnapping emerged. No ransom demand. No body. No forensic evidence pointing to a specific perpetrator. Theory 2, runaway. Some officers suggested Evelyn might have simply decided to leave. Perhaps she was unhappy. Perhaps she wanted a fresh start. This theory made sense in some ways, but it also raised questions. Why would a pharmacy student, someone on track to earn a degree, someone with family, someone with community ties, simply abandon everything? And if she had run away, wouldn't she at least contact someone? A friend? A sibling? After a few years, wouldn't the need for human connection overcome her apparent desire for disappearance? Harrison pursued both theories simultaneously, which meant his investigation branched in multiple directions. He interviewed Evelyn's family extensively. The conversations were painful. Evelyn's father was stoic, almost silent. Her mother was anguished, desperate to help solve the mystery but also seemingly holding something back. Harrison, trained in reading people, sensed there was more to the family dynamic than they were revealing. But he couldn't force information out of them. He could only observe, document, and continue his investigation. He questioned her coworkers at the pharmacy. Sarah, who'd heard those final maybe words, was helpful but couldn't provide much concrete information. Other employees remembered Evelyn as quiet, professional, unremarkable. No scandals. No romantic entanglements. No evidence of theft or embezzlement. She seemed perfectly fine. He examined her apartment. Sparse, neat, organized. Nothing suggested a violent removal. Nothing suggested she was planning to leave. But nothing conclusively ruled it out either. The problem was this: there were too many possibilities and not enough evidence to narrow them down. Harrison's frustration grew as weeks turned to months. He revisited the timeline obsessively. He looked for inconsistencies in witness statements. He pursued every tip that came through, no matter how unlikely. But investigation requires evidence. And evidence was precisely what this case lacked. By late 1995, Detective Harrison had dozens of leads and exactly 0 solid breakthroughs. He had a missing woman, a bewildered family, and a town that wanted answers. He had his own determination and his detective's instinct. But instinct doesn't solve cases. Evidence does. And as autumn turned to winter and winter turned to spring, the evidence simply wasn't there. For Evelyn's mother, the years that followed her daughter's disappearance became a study in psychological torture. The first year was marked by active grief. Searching. Hoping. Praying. Evelyn's mother contacted police weekly. She printed more flyers. She participated in search efforts. She held on to the belief that this was a temporary situation, that Evelyn would be found, that there would be an explanation, that her daughter would come home. But the second year was different. Denial gave way to a horrible, creeping realization. Her daughter might be gone. Permanently. The not knowing became its own kind of torment. Was Evelyn alive somewhere, suffering? Dead somewhere, buried where no one would find her? The questions cycled endlessly. On September 15th each year, the anniversary of Evelyn's disappearance, her mother experienced a fresh wave of grief. She would wake up thinking of her daughter at age 22, then 23, then 25. Would Evelyn be married now? Would she have children? Would she still remember her mother's birthday? These questions tortured her. Evelyn's mother began to withdraw from normal life. She stopped working regularly. She struggled to maintain relationships. She became obsessed with true crime, with missing persons cases, with the possibility that someone, somewhere, might have information about her daughter. She attended support groups for families of missing persons. She found strange comfort in shared anguish, others who understood the specific pain of not knowing. Her faith, which had been central to her identity, became complicated. She prayed for her daughter's safety. She prayed for closure. She prayed for forgiveness, sometimes for herself, sometimes for the universe, sometimes for God, if he even existed. Evelyn's father, by contrast, retreated almost entirely. He became a man of silence. He worked. He came home. He didn't speak about Evelyn's disappearance. Some family members wondered if he'd simply shut down emotionally. Others suspected he was harboring guilt, though guilt for what, no one quite understood. Had there been an argument? Had he said something that drove her away? Had his adherence to family tradition in some way contributed to her disappearance? Evelyn's siblings were caught between two parents spiraling in different directions. One became obsessed with finding answers. The other refused to engage with the question at all. The house that had once contained a family became a place of fracture and pain. As decade succeeded decade, the grief didn't disappear. It transformed. It became background radiation. It became the water they swam in, invisible but constant. Birthdays came. Holidays came. Milestones, Evelyn's high school graduating class reunions, college graduation ceremonies she would never attend, came and went, and each one was a fresh wound. By 2010, when Evelyn would have been in her mid-30s, her mother was gray and worn. The years of not knowing had aged her beyond her actual years. She had become the physical embodiment of unresolved grief. Where was her daughter? Was she alive? Was she happy? Did she ever think about her family? These questions never stopped. By 2005, years into Evelyn King's disappearance, the case had officially gone cold. The Cheyenne Police Department didn't have the resources to maintain active investigation into cases that weren't generating new leads. Evelyn's file was moved to a cardboard box. It was stored in the basement. It was official: Evelyn King, missing person, unsolved. Detective Harrison was reassigned to active cases. Cases with fresh evidence. Cases with a reasonable chance of being solved. He carried Evelyn's case in his heart. He pulled out her file occasionally, reviewed it, wondered about what he'd missed, but he no longer had the authority or resources to actively investigate. Years accumulated. The 1990s became the 2000s. The 2000s became the 2010s. Technology evolved in ways that would have been unimaginable in 1995. The internet became ubiquitous. Cell phones became universal. Social media emerged. The digital age created a trail of information everywhere a person went. But Evelyn's cold case file remained untouched. DNA technology advanced dramatically. Genealogical databases began to emerge. Police departments across the country began to use these new tools to solve cold cases. But Cheyenne's resources were limited. There were newer cases, fresher cases, cases with more obvious pathways to resolution. Evelyn's disappearance became historical. A legend. A story told and retold, growing less specific with each telling. The Cheyenne of 2024 was different from the Cheyenne of 1995. New people lived there. Younger people. People who'd never heard of Evelyn King. The town had moved on. The case remained unsolved, but it had passed from active consciousness into dormancy. For Detective Harrison, however, the case never truly went away. He retired from the police force in 2012. He was 60 years old. He'd spent a career solving crimes, catching criminals, bringing justice to victims. But Evelyn King, this one girl, this one mystery, had eluded him for 17 years. He took her file with him into retirement. He kept it in his home office. He would look at it occasionally. He would think about what he'd missed. He would replay conversations with her family, her coworkers, her friends. Had they lied? Had they known more than they revealed? Had his investigation missed something crucial? These questions haunted him. For Evelyn's mother, the decades were perhaps even worse. She had aged into her 70s with her daughters still missing. She had attended her other children's weddings. She had met grandchildren. She had become a grandmother while her eldest daughter remained frozen at age 21 in everyone's memory. She had begun to fear that she would die without ever knowing what happened to Evelyn. The thought terrified her more than death itself. By 2020, when Evelyn would have been 46 years old, the case was 25 years old. A generation had passed. The people who remembered her clearly were aging. Police officers had retired. Witnesses had moved away or died. The urgency of the mystery had calcified into despair. No one was looking for Evelyn King anymore. She had been erased from the active consciousness of the town that had once searched for her so desperately. In 2023, nearly 28 years after Evelyn King's disappearance, a cold case detective named Sarah Vasquez was assigned to review unsolved cases in the Cheyenne Police Archives. Vasquez was younger than Harrison had been. She was part of a generation of law enforcement that had grown up with advancing DNA technology. She understood genealogical databases. She knew about GEDmatch. She understood how a single DNA match could unravel a mystery that had seemed unsolvable for decades. As she reviewed the Evelyn King file, something occurred to her. Why hasn't this DNA been tested? Police had preserved a biological sample from Evelyn's apartment. Hair, a brush, items that contained her DNA. In 1995, DNA technology existed but wasn't sophisticated enough or cheap enough to be routinely used in missing persons cases. But by 2023, DNA testing was standard. It was affordable. It was powerful. Detective Vasquez made a decision. She would submit Evelyn's DNA to a genealogical database. The process took weeks. The DNA had to be extracted, processed, and uploaded. Vasquez had to wait for matches to emerge in the genealogical database. Relatives of Evelyn who had submitted their DNA through services like Ancestry.com or 23andMe for their own reasons. These distant relatives would show a connection to Evelyn, allowing investigators to build a family tree and potentially locate her. Weeks turned into a month. Vasquez was patient. The system would work if given time. Then in early 2024, the match came through. A female relative, a cousin, had uploaded her DNA to a genealogical database. The system flagged a connection to Evelyn. Through genealogical reconstruction, Vasquez began to build a family tree. She traced branches. She eliminated possibilities. She narrowed down living relatives. But here's where the case took an extraordinary turn. One of the individuals in the genealogical tree lived in South Dakota. A woman in her mid-50s. Someone with a different last name. Someone with a life that seemed unconnected to a missing pharmacy student from Wyoming. Vasquez looked at this woman's information. Then she compared it to Evelyn's. Age would match. Geographic location made sense. South Dakota was close enough to Wyoming that an escape would be feasible. The genealogical connection was undeniable. Vasquez contacted her superiors. She made her case. This woman in South Dakota, could she be Evelyn? The authorities decided to reach out. In the spring of 2024, 29 years after vanishing, someone knocked on this woman's door. A South Dakota police officer, acting on a request from Wyoming authorities, asked to speak with her about an old missing persons case. What happened next was extraordinary. The woman confirmed it. Yes, she was Evelyn King. Yes, she had disappeared in 1995. Yes, she'd been living in South Dakota under a different name for nearly 3 decades. Within hours, word reached Cheyenne. Within days, it reached Evelyn's family. The woman everyone had assumed was dead or in grave danger was alive. She had been alive the entire time. She had built a life. She had survived. She had created a new identity and maintained it for 29 years. Evelyn King had been found. But finding her only created new questions. Questions about why she had run, questions about what had happened in 1995, questions about the mysterious force that had driven a brilliant 21-year-old pharmacy student to abandon her entire existence. Those answers would soon come. And they would complicate everything. When Evelyn finally spoke to authorities, and later when she was willing to discuss her case publicly, the story she told was not one of victimization by a stranger. It was a story of victimization by tradition, by family, by a system that gave her no choices. In Evelyn's family, arranged marriage was not a quaint historical practice. It was a living tradition, maintained with the same seriousness as it had been in her parents' homeland. The concept was straightforward. The parents would identify a suitable partner. The young person would accept this partner. A marriage would be arranged. Love, if it came, would come later. For centuries in Evelyn's ancestral culture, this system had worked. Young people had accepted their parents' choices because the alternative, rebellion, shame, isolation, was simply unthinkable. But Evelyn was American. She had grown up in the 1980s. She had absorbed different values. The idea that her parents could choose a husband for her felt not like tradition but like tyranny. By 1995, the process was already in motion. Evelyn's parents had identified a suitable man, someone from their cultural community, someone with respectable employment, someone whom, they believed, would make a good husband and father. They told Evelyn about him. They presented it not as a question or an option but as a decision already made. Her role was to accept gracefully. Evelyn refused. The refusal was shocking to her parents. In their world, daughters didn't refuse. They complied. They trusted their parents' judgment. They understood that this was how things were done. But Evelyn had spent years in pharmacy school. She had earned her own money. She had tasted independence. The idea of surrendering her autonomy to a man she hadn't chosen, a man she'd never even met, felt like suffocation. She expressed her objections. She told her parents she wanted to choose her own husband. She wanted to finish her education. She wanted time to develop her own life. Her parents listened but didn't truly hear. In their view, Evelyn was being disrespectful. She was being influenced by American culture, which they viewed as corrupting. She needed to be guided back to the proper way, the traditional way. As summer turned to fall in 1995, the pressure intensified. The arranged marriage wasn't some distant future event anymore. It was happening. So, meetings were being arranged. Preparations were being made. For Evelyn, this escalation was the final catalyst. By mid-September, she had made a decision. She would rather disappear than marry this man. She had been planning, saving money, thinking about how and where she could go. She reached out to someone, whether a friend or an acquaintance who sympathized with her situation, we may never know completely, and made arrangements to leave Cheyenne. On September 15, 1995, when Evelyn punched out of her pharmacy job, she had a one-way plan. She had money. She had a destination. She had made peace with the fact that leaving meant losing her family. It meant becoming someone new. She drove, or was driven, out of Cheyenne. She crossed the state line into South Dakota. She found refuge with someone willing to help her. And she became someone else. The arranged marriage never happened. Her parents never found her. For 29 years, Evelyn King existed in a state of self-imposed exile, living in freedom but also in isolation. She didn't contact her family. She couldn't. To reveal her location would mean returning to the very situation she'd fled. The cost of her freedom was devastating for those left behind. Her mother spent decades not knowing if her daughter was alive or dead. Her father carried the burden of having driven his daughter away. Her siblings lost their sister. A community lost a mystery that would haunt them for nearly 3 decades. But Evelyn survived. She built a life. She stayed alive. And she kept the secret of her escape intact, until DNA and genealogy finally caught up to her in 2024. The moment when Evelyn King answered that door in South Dakota, the moment a police officer told her that her family had been searching for her for 29 years, must have been indescribable. According to later accounts, Evelyn's first reaction was shock, then confusion, then, slowly, understanding. She was crying. A woman in her 50s, suddenly confronted with the reality that her family had never stopped looking for her, that they'd believed her missing all these years, that her mother, had been waiting decades for answers. Evelyn confirmed her identity. She answered questions. She provided information about her escape. Over the following days she would tell authorities everything: how she'd left Cheyenne, who had helped her, how she'd built her life in South Dakota. She admitted that she had known all these years that her family was suffering. She knew they were searching for her. But she also knew that revealing her location would mean returning to the marriage her parents wanted for her, or at least confronting that pressure again. She had chosen isolation over subjugation. When word reached Cheyenne, when news broke that Evelyn King had been found alive, the reaction was complex. There was relief that she hadn't been murdered or kidnapped. There was joy that she was alive. But there was also anger, betrayal, confusion. How could she not contact her family? How could she leave them in darkness for 29 years? What could possibly justify this? Evelyn's mother, now in her 80s, experienced a whirlwind of emotions. She wept. She demanded to speak with her daughter. She wanted answers. She wanted explanations. She wanted to understand why Evelyn had abandoned her. When they finally spoke by phone, the conversation was difficult. Tears. Accusations. Attempts at explanation that fell short of justifying the silence. Evelyn's mother wanted her daughter to come home, to reconcile, to repair the damage. Evelyn was hesitant. Coming home meant confronting the family dynamics that had driven her away. It meant risking the same pressure to conform. It meant undoing 29 years of separation and independence. Over the following months, there were cautious attempts at reconciliation. Evelyn agreed to some limited contact with her family. She explained her side of the story: the unbearable pressure of the arranged marriage, the impossibility of saying no within her family structure, the desperate choice to disappear rather than surrender her autonomy. Her family began to understand, though understanding didn't erase pain. Her mother loved her daughter. But she also grieved the 29 years they'd lost. She grieved not being there for Evelyn's adult life. She grieved the grandchildren she would never know. She grieved the sister her other children could have maintained relationships with. When Evelyn King was found alive in 2024, there was no criminal to prosecute. There was no murderer to arrest. There was no dramatic courtroom scene where justice was served. Instead, there was a family grappling with profound complexity. Evelyn had committed no crime. She had hurt her family deeply, but she had also saved her own life. She had run to preserve her autonomy, her future, her right to self-determination. In America, that should be protected. That should be celebrated even. But it was also devastating for those left behind. The case of Evelyn King forced people to reckon with uncomfortable questions. In a society that values freedom, what should a young woman do when her family tries to force her into an arranged marriage? Does she have the right to disappear? Does she have an obligation to contact her family, even if doing so would undo her escape? There are no easy answers. In the months and years following her discovery, Evelyn's case attracted international attention. It raised awareness about forced marriage practices in immigrant communities in America. Some organizations used her story as a cautionary tale. Others used it as a rallying point for reforms that would better protect young people in similar situations. Evelyn herself became, reluctantly, an advocate. She spoke about her experience. She explained what it felt like to be caught between two cultures, two value systems, two versions of what a woman's life should look like. For her parents, understanding came slowly. They were old enough now that they couldn't maintain the same rigid worldview they'd held in 1995. They began to grasp what their daughter had experienced. They began to understand that their attempt to control her future had driven her away. This understanding didn't erase their grief, but it provided some context for it. Some framework in which to place it. Evelyn's mother, in her final years, spoke publicly about her daughter's disappearance and discovery. She expressed regret about not listening to her daughter. She spoke about the years of not knowing. And she spoke, finally, with pride in her daughter's strength. Detective Sarah Vasquez, who had solved the case through genealogical DNA, became something of a minor celebrity. Her use of new technology to solve an old mystery attracted media attention and police interest. Other cold case detectives began to pursue similar approaches, using genealogy and DNA to locate missing persons and solve historic crimes. Evelyn King's case became a template. In Cheyenne, the town that had searched for her so desperately in 1995 had to reckon with a new reality. The girl they'd been searching for hadn't been kidnapped. She had run. And in running, she had broken hearts and created lasting wounds. But she had also asserted her right to exist on her own terms. That is not a comfortable legacy for a community to inherit. But it is a real one. Evelyn King lived for 29 years in isolation, in silence, in freedom. She built a life that was her own. She made choices, difficult, painful, isolating choices, but they were her choices. When she was found, she didn't return to Cheyenne. She didn't reverse her escape. She maintained her life in South Dakota, though she agreed to limited contact with her family. She had run to save herself. And that, ultimately, is what she did. In 2024, Evelyn King, 50 years old, is alive. She has built a life. She has survived. The mystery of her disappearance is solved. But the questions her story raises, about freedom, family, tradition, autonomy, and the cost of self-determination, those questions will echo for generations. But here's what no one expects. In 2024, after nearly 3 decades of searching, investigators finally find her. She's alive. She's been alive the entire time. And the moment they locate her, everything the town believed about her disappearance shatters. Because Evelyn King didn't vanish. She ran. What happened in those 29 years of silence? What forced a 21-year-old pharmacy student to abandon her entire life, her family, her identity? That's the mystery we're about to uncover. But before we do, I need to know, where are you watching from right now? Drop your country in the comments. Let's see how far Evelyn's story travels. This is her case. This is her truth.